it would cost me £140,000 in money, right? Because that would go out in charges over that 25-year period. If it went to 1.5% from the 0.4% that I've got now, it would cost me an additional £250,000, Ed. £250,000.
You're doing really well, salute you for that. But you are now reaching a point where charges become a more interesting problem.
Yep.
So that is the fees that you pay on your pension. So there's all sorts of different fees that you can end up paying depending on your provider. But the two basic ones for the purpose of this discussion are the fees you'll pay on the funds you hold. So that'll be an ongoing charging fee effectively that you get charged every year. Then you typically have a platform fee. Now, Chris, are you going to talk me through exactly what it is that you've got and your charges? I'm interested to hear.
I'm going to do my best. I have to say that it can be quite difficult to nail all of that down. So I've enlisted the help of AI here. So there may be a slight sort of deviation. But what it does is it helps to paint the picture of the value of that and why it's important to try and look at the charges over that period of time, as you rightly pointed out. So based on the cost, so the first decision I've made is that I've got a couple of legacy active managed funds that perform perfectly well, by the way, and have done really well if you look at the projections over that period of time. But the first thing I did was, if I want to rebalance this and just keep that kind of geographical spread and just buy those cheap trackers, then I probably need to move away from these slightly more expensive managed funds. So I've sold a couple of the holdings within those and moved those into trying to make a better geographical split. So we can come on to that maybe later, potentially, about what that looks like. But that means that those charges are around about, for each of those funds, around about the 0.1% mark, essentially. So as cheap as it can go with those kind of things. And then, as you really point out, Hargreaves has a platform charge of 0.35%, I think it is. So that's for holding that money on the platform and for them executing those trades. And also there's a dealing charge, which is nominal, £3 or £4 whenever you move holdings out of a fund. Now, I'm not doing that all the time. So only when I do these kind of rebalancing exercises when that happens. So I swallow that, which is not particularly bad either. And then you've got the Legal & General platform stuff, which is my workplace pension. And that, from what I can see, that's incredibly cheap. So it's a platform fee of 0.25%, so slightly cheaper than the Hargreaves. And the funds that I bought there, which again, these tracker ones, are around that 0.1% mark as well. So it's all adding up to a blended cost of somewhere between 0.4% and 0.5% on a portfolio, which is not amazingly dirt cheap, but it's also not at the expensive end either. And so I had a look at what the impact of that could be on a portfolio, right? So if that 0.4% were to rise to 1% with charges, so if I wasn't on top of it and didn't look at it over that time period, then what I'm getting estimated here is that it would cost me £140,000 in money, right? Because that would go out in charges over that 25-year period. If it went to 1.5% from the 0.4% that I've got now, it would cost me an additional £250,000, Ed. £250,000. So if you're looking at, you're talking early on about, I'm getting excited about having reached 100,000, right? The idea of me not throwing that away, but losing that through not staying on top of this annually, looking at where costs are and charges are and all that kind of thing, and losing £250,000 just through inaction or not paying attention to what I'm in, that feels criminal to me. As well as this discipline of contributing, taking advantage of the benefits of employers contributing, which is a massive part of it. The tax relief stuff you talked about there, it's very tax efficient to save into a pension. The returns, so making sure I'm invested in that equity stuff to get the returns that I think I'll need over that period of time to grow the pot more. Those charges are actually a massive component when you look at it like that. And it's something I'm only really now paying a huge attention to. But luckily, I haven't been too badly stung by that over the period up until now. I've been saving because I ended up sticking it in these cheap trackers anyway, because it was part of the way that I was thinking about it. It's important to check. As you say, I'm not a financial advisor. This isn't financial advice, but being aware of those things and factoring it into your decision making is massively important, because as we've seen, it can have a material effect on what your retirement pot's going to look like.
What is quite important to think about now at this point is, although those kind of platform fees aren't terrible, you are now at a point where even a kind of relatively low percentage figure is going to start costing you. So, the difference between the charges you pay if you've got a £15,000 pension pot and a £100,000 pension pot, even at the same percentage figure of 0.35 or whatever it might be, the cost is much higher for you when you've got a larger amount of money in there, because just the way the percentage works. So what is important to think about when you start getting to this level, and this is for anybody who's probably over about £50,000, although I would urge anybody to do their own sums on it, is to start looking at whether actually a fixed fee platform starts to make more sense. Now, there is one major one, which is a competitor to some of the ones we've named, which is Interactive Investor. Their charging structure is a little bit, I think, perhaps more complicated than it used to be. But yeah, what happens when you move to a fixed fee is suddenly actually the value of your portfolio no longer really matters, and the relative cost comes down the bigger your portfolio gets, and it basically gets cheaper the more you've got in your pension. So I think that's a really interesting thing. I'd say it's worth, in your situation now, Chris, considering and having an eye over. Obviously, again, people got to do their kind of sums on it, and it can be really tricky to do this. I was trying to look up some of these charging figures because I went back in the day when I used to write about this all the time. I used to be really on top of it, but we used to have to get help from other organizations to unpack all the myriad of fees. And there's so many different platforms and so many different choices and so many different kinds of fees and the way they charge things. And it's a real mess. But I think it is really important to keep in mind, especially in light of what you mentioned there about spending £250,000 in fees. That's wild. That's really wild. That's a lot of money. That's not trifling amounts of cash. So yeah, I think that's really important to keep in mind.